Imagine the game that promised to be the ultimate MMORPG. Massive open worlds, dynamic combat, epic dungeons, and even battles with the sea monsters. Sounds too good to be true. Well, in today's video we are talking about the Quinfall, the game everyone is talking about, or at least everyone is talking about when they launch another trailer. And I will give you a natural deep dive of what the developers promise, what they have on their roadmap, and what we actually have in the game right now. I will also share my personal experience, opinion, and thoughts of the future of the game. Is it worth checking right now, or is it another broken dream? My name is PLK, please subscribe to the channel, love you guys, and stick around to find out. Let's start with everything about the game. PVE Technologies is the developer of the Quinfall. They had only one project before this, and at that time they had a different studio name. The game was Cairo Online. Doesn't sound familiar for you? Yeah, for me as well. Nobody really knows this game. It's basically that, or it was only for the local market, I don't know, but that's what developers told us. So now, in 2023, the developer suddenly appeared out of the blue with the trailer and a lot of details about the new game. According to them, if you can imagine your ideal MMORPG, the Quinfall will have it. At least from what they claimed in the trailers in 2023. Great visuals on Unity with the ray tracing, day and night cycle, 4 seasons with visible weather changes like snow, rain and storms. A medieval fantasy setting, the biggest open world, 2016 square meters, divided into 5 regions, each with unique climate and environment. A deep character creation system, super dynamic non-target action combat system, good lore and story, real economics. Sorry, I'm laughing, but it's too much for one MMORPG, but we will continue. Real economics, caravans, land and property ownerships, your own island to create, design and build. Lots of PvP and PvE activities, world bosses, dungeons, raids, quests, daily quests, main and side zone quests, and so on, so on, so on. A super deep crafting system, life professions and more. Open PvP, PK system, guild and castle sieges, plus super optimization and low requirements. Of course, the MMO community is already quite matured. We know why developers make this kind of the promises, and we need to check if any of it is true. Many people didn't believe it right from the start. But the main goal of that trailer was met. The game gained publicity and visibility. The developers should be happy about that. However, I don't think so. I don't think it turned out well for them, because they promised so much that the community started to examine the game under the microscopes. A lot of people on Reddit didn't even believe that game existed, comparing it to something like the day before. Long story short, the community pushed back, and the developers had to publicly announce the alpha test. At first, they said everything would be free for the players at all stages of the game development. Then they wanted money for the test keys, maybe looking toward the Ashes of Creation model, I'm not sure. But in the end, players got 2 alpha tests free by invitation, and now we have a fairly cheap early access. So at least they aren't lying around that. The good news is the developers also shared a roadmap of the development plan. It's actually pretty deep and detailed, with 75 points. We can see some strange things there, like dungeons at 20% only, world bosses at low percentage, wars at low percentage, ships wars and more, but at least we see something that they are planning to do. I didn't find anything specific about the combat system, movement system or visuals. It's more about in-game mechanics, so it's not much help in figuring out how close we are to 100% completion of those areas. And those areas, we'll talk about them a little bit later. Now let's talk about the early access. What we actually have in the game right now and how it compares to everything that they promised. The short version is visually in 2023 trailer, and current in-game experience looks like 2 different projects. It seems the trailer showed what is something called a beautiful corner prototype. Basically something polished to look as cool as possible, even if it's not feasible to implement in the full game yet, due to the optimization limits, lack of different artists, and so on. If we'll compare the footage, the environment in the actual game is much simpler and lower quality, though somewhat comparable to the trailer in some aspects. But if we look at the visual effects for spells and skills, those appear to be completely different assets in the game right now. It looks like we are dealing with some placeholders for many things in the game at the moment. To be honest, that's not a big issue from my perspective, because for now it's just the money problem. If the developers will get some money from the early access or additional investors, they will just hire a few people who will make these fixes good, animations better, and so on. So I don't think the developers intended to scam somebody. It's not the day before situation, I hope so. But it looks like we're dealing with a lot of assets and systems pulled from the various sources and thrown together, not really polished or even tried to be consistent with the art style or something like that. If you check some of the dungeon footage from the trailer, even there it looks like they just bought some assets and dropped them into the water without much thought. Maybe just in sake to show something cool, I don't know. However, the main issue of the game is, from my perspective, is combat system and movement system. Honestly, they are super clunky and basically unplayable in 2025. But let's break this video to the main points of the game, starting with the launch of the early access and talking about all the main systems and content that we have in the game and the future of this project. Let's go! Character creation. The game features a fairly deep character creation tool, and let's be honest, we all love to create characters. While it's not the most important part of the MMORPG, having a detailed character creator really helps with immersion and connecting emotion to a character. It's really great to have this level of the customization. Here, the character creation system feels like very similar to something in Black Desert Online. You can customize almost any part of the body: face, hair, eyes, nose, and more. It's simple to use and have plenty of options. For MMORPG, it's the solid character creator. However, that's something strange here. For some reason, all the female characters looks, well, let's say, not great. You can tweak every detail and even add veins and muscles, but the faces always end up looking quite unattractive. That said, the developers didn't forget about really important things like jiggle physics. Yes, there is jiggle physics for both chest and the other areas. So you will have these characters running around the world with less than appealing faces but very bouncy features. And the only way to make the female character look somewhat interesting is to completely paint over them with the colors and patterns. So yeah, that's an option. Overall though, it's a decent character creation tool for an MMORPG. It gets the job done. Server stability. When the game launched on January 25th, we all jumped in, excited to explore a brand new MMORPG. Unsurprisingly, the servers were unstable, typical for the launch of any MMORPG. That's fine, we're already used to that, so not a big problem. A flood of players rushing to experience the new world is always chaotic, but also kind of fun on its own way. Long queues, lags, it's nothing we haven't seen before. The real issue though, this early access didn't launch with a lot of hype. Many players already approached this game with a pinch of skepticism, thanks to the mixed feedbacks from the testers. As a result, according to the SteamDB, only around 6,000 people logged in at launch. The game currently has 3 servers: European, American and Asian. But here's the thing, on the date of the video recording, January 26th, just 2 full days after the launch, the European servers still doesn't work properly. You can create a character and maybe play for a few seconds or minutes, but then you get disconnected. After that, reconnecting is nearly impossible. And there are tons of other issues. Because of this, most of us ended up playing on American servers. While they also disconnect occasionally, they're at least stable enough to be playable. For some reason, the American servers seem to be performing better. Maybe it's servers infrastructure in Chicago, where the servers are hosted, or something else entirely. But for now, we are sticking to the American servers. And I get it. This is the early access, and issues like this are expected. Developers use this phase to test and improve the game. However, let's be honest, 6,000 players and now it's only 3,000 players playing. And even with such low numbers, servers are like garbage. Working like garbage. That's pretty strange, to say the least. My first experience in the game. After creating my character and dealing with all these server issues, I finally got into the game and started the tutorial. The tutorial was strange. It consisted of UI arrows pointing out different systems on the screen, explaining what everything does. It showcased a ton of features that again felt very similar to the Black Desert Online. After clicking through all of it, the game started teaching me the basics: how to move, attack and gather resources. What stood out as odd was that the tutorial took place in a zone you'll never actually play in. I felt like the game assumed you'd never touched MMORPG before. Normally the tutorials in modern games are woven into the experience through the quest or interesting scenarios that teach mechanics while you play. Here it just felt disconnected. After finishing the tutorial, the game sent me to the first town, and the first thing that hits me was the visuals. We have all seen the trailers, and then you log into the actual game and see what I saw on the screen. Let's just say it was a bit disappointing. But we'll talk about the visuals a bit later. Once you're in the world, you start doing quests. After dealing with the servers, you're immediately thrown into another round of "Hear how this works." The quest explains things like visiting a merchant to buy a potion or find an NPC to learn about horses and how to use a lasso. It's fine for the new game, but it feels like you're playing through the second tutorial right away. And one that's oddly reminiscent of BDO, even though this is a completely different game. The experience was strange, but it worked well enough to introduce you to the game world. You see the other players, you start running around, you are ready to dive in. Which brings us to one of the most critical aspects of the modern MMORPG, the combat system and the movement system. In the games like this, if the combat system, skill system, the character building system is not fun or engaging, it's hard to stay invested in the game. Especially if you have action non-targeting combat system, the main thing of the game around it, right? If it doesn't feel good, you might even not make it to the real content, like the end game. So let's talk about that next. Combat system. After dealing with the server stability issues, exploring the character creation system and comparing the game actual visuals to its trailers, we moved on to perhaps the most important part of any MMORPG, the combat system and the movement system. They are the core of how we experience the game and what we'll spend the majority of our time doing: fighting monsters. The combat system in the Quinfall is fairly straightforward. You have several weapon types to choose from, and each weapon comes with 2 skill trees. Each tree has 6 active skills and 3 passive sub-skills for each for those active abilities. The passive sub-skills are pretty basic. They reduce cooldowns, increase the area of effect, or add a percentage bonus to damage, or something like that. I started my experimentation with the Fire Staff, a magical weapon. It offers 2 development trees, one focused on the fire and one focused on the ice. For example, the fire tree begins with a fireball, while the ice tree starts with a frost arrow. The progression system works as follows. Your character gains levels by earning experience, and weapon usage earns your points to unlock skills. To upgrade those skills further, you will need to collect the skill books, which can be obtained through quests or grinding. As I said already, the combat system feels like the developers wanted to achieve something close to the Black Desert Online, at least from a game design point of view. You have mobs standing in small groups of 3 or 4, some of which includes champion mobs, stronger enemies that likely require high levels of small parties to defeat. The system seems designed to encourage to use the LE abilities, chaining skills together, and dynamic combat. But in practice, it's a very different experience. The game uses an action, non-target combat system. One more time, much like BDO. However, the combat is extremely clunky and disappointing. It's so rough that at first I thought it might be the server lag causing the issues. After testing this over several days, I realized it wasn't the servers. The core combat system itself is flawed. Playing as the mage with the magical staff, I noticed that all of my abilities had cast types. You can't move while you're casting, and every skill requires you to select a specific target area on the ground. For instance, casting Fireball involves clicking to choose where the spell will land, then waiting for a 2-second cast time, and if you move during the cast, the spell gets cancelled. But here is the kicker: the cooldown starts anyway, and the spell isn't even cast. Most mobs don't even respond properly to the attacks. About 80% of the enemies I targeted just stood still while I cast my spells. Occasionally some would run towards me, but by the time they reached me, I was stuck casting again, forcing me to roll backward like in Souls games, only to repeat the same cycle: cast, roll back, cast again. The animations for weapons like swords or hammers feels awkward and unpolished. It's as if they were pulled directly from a set store and inserted into the game without refinement. For example, swinging the hammer doesn't convey the weight or inertia you'd expect. It's just a placeholder animation. The same goes with any visual effects in the game at the moment. Compared to the 2023 trailer, where the effects looks vibrant and polished, at least to some degree, in the in-game VFX are basic and feels outdated, reminiscent of something from old-school RuneScape. The movement system suffers from similar problems. It's jittery and unresponsive, making the gameplay feel dated. You can spam the jump button endlessly, and your character ends up bouncing around like a cartoon ninja from Naruto. Additionally, the mechanics for interrupting spells are frustrating. if you accidentally nudge the movement key while you're casting, your spell gets interrupted, goes on cooldown, and you're left waiting, even though the ability wasn't used. The game also have a combo system, where using certain abilities unlock others with buffs. However, even if you haven't unlocked a particular combo skill, or if it's on cooldown, the game still lets you press the button, resulting on nothing happening. It's a strange design choice that feels incomplete even for the early access. Overall combat experience: the combat system is rough, unpolished, and outdated. It tries to emulate modern action MMORPGs, but feels like something from the early 2000s. While players don't necessarily expect the combat on the level of the Black Desert Online, or modern gacha games with smooth, fluid mechanics, they do expect something polished enough to feel satisfying. Instead, Quinfall delivers a clunky, frustrating experience that feels like a mix of Ultima Online and RuneScape pretending to be the BDO. The only reason players might continue with this combat system is if the game offers compelling content. And that's what we'll explore the next: visual elements, effects, and the content available in the game. Visual effects, graphics, and sounds. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about visuals in the game. Right from the start, it's clear that what we see in the actual game doesn't match what was shown in the trailers 2 years ago. There are some similarities in the vegetation system and the overall environment, and I will admit, it can look pretty interesting when you're riding the horse through the open world with the forest in the distance that's creating some atmosphere. It feels like there is some potential here. But once again, when you start to look closer at props, assets, trees, and grass, all falls apart. The details feels unfinished and unpolished. I tested the game in the highest setting, Ultra Graphics, and there is even an option called Remastered. Honestly, I couldn't figure out what Remastered really means. Turning it on seemed to add more light sources, maybe ray tracing, but on my Super RTX 4070, the game struggles to stay at 30 FPS in the town, even with almost nothing on the screen. On the Ultra Graphic without the remastered settings, it's run around 120 FPS. So I stuck to that for playability. The remastered mode is basically unplayable and seems more like a testing feature or something like that. The game is built on Unity, and I'll be honest, that's not great. The problem with Unity is that the developers don't put significant effort into polishing the visuals. The game ends up looking extremely mediocre. For example, while Unreal Engine games might suffer from the all looking similar due to heavy use of marketplace assets, they still tend to look visually acceptable, even if they lack originality. But Unity doesn't have that baseline polish. Everything here feels rough and uninspired. One interesting moment happened on my second day playing the game. The same location that had been green and summery suddenly transitioned to the winter, with snow covering everything: buildings, grass, NPCs, even the areas with mobs roam. That was genuinely cool. I have never seen a multiplayer game do something like that before, whether it's part of seasonal cycle or just a test. It was impressive and added some depth to the world. But as with everything else in the game, the execution was underwhelming. For example, the snow trucks left behind by the mobs and players are a really nice idea. When you run through the snow, you leave a trail, and the same goes for the mobs. But visually it's so poorly done that you almost wish it wasn't there at all. It might have been better if the snow simply compressed underfoot and returned normal over time. For now, it's an interesting concept, but the placeholder visuals make it look cheap and unrefined. As for the sound, it's practically non-existent. Just look at this video. This is the real video from the game without any additions. And you can hear there is some background music and a few scattered sounds effects, but they often overlap in strange ways. It's hard to tell what's happening, what skills you are casting, or who's attacking you. The audio design feels like it was thrown together as an afterthought, leaving the combat and overall immersion lacking. And one more time, this is the early access. That's not the biggest problem. I'm just counting things that, looks not particularly good. But we can just drop all of this if the combat system will be, I don't know, not even refined, like remastered or remade. Now let's talk about content, PvE and PvP. Let's talk about the systems and the content promised by the developers, what we actually see in the Quinfall early access. The developers promised a massive open world, and they are delivered on the size. you can see it by the map. The map is generally huge, with the 5 distinct regions and features like climate change, such as the snow I mentioned earlier. There are live professions and sandbox-style economy, caravans, and an open marketplace where players can trade. Additionally, the game offers activities like farming, building, and even design your own land, island, and structures. All of this sounds amazing on paper, but here is the catch. While these features technically exist in the game, we can see it and we have them in the roadmap, the level of the implementation remains unclear. According to the developer's roadmap, everything is included to some degree, but the extent of functionality isn't always clear. They basically not lying, this stuff is in the game. But how deep or polished it is, this is still a big question. Will it even be implemented in future? That's also the question, right? So, PVE content. Let's start with the PVE. One strange feature happens right after completing the tutorial. You are given the choice of permanent buffs for your character. These buffs influence things like gathering, fishing, mining, critical hits, or PvP and PvE damage. But here's the issue. You're making this choice before knowing anything about the game, and it's permanent buff. And one more time, here's the kicker. You can change these permanent buffs later on, but only with using premium in-game currency, which is purchased with the real money. It's an odd design choice by the developers. Moving forward, the game introduces you to PvE activities like quests and grinding mobs. The map is enormous, with many zones featuring monsters of varying levels and cities where you pick your tasks. The quests themselves are pretty standard. Kill this number of mobs or collect this number of items. Beyond that, there is grinding mobs to earn experience and loot. The more interesting content comes later, or at least that's what the developers had promised. For instance, there are dungeons, but here is the bad news. According to the roadmap, these dungeons are only 20% complete. That's a worrying sign. What does it mean, 20% of the dungeon? Is it like one dungeon, or is like all the dungeons, but you can't complete them more than 20%? Like, what does it mean? The developers claim that these dungeons will include puzzles and loot system and bosses, offering a layer of depth that the games like Black Desert Online don't really have. However, it's unclear how much of this is playable in early access, or whether it's still largely conceptual. The developers also promise a significant focus on novel content, which includes ships, sailing, and battles with the sea bosses. For example, the Kraken was showcased in the trailers before the early access. It looks very interesting, but it's unclear how much of this content is actually available in the current version. Most likely, much of it isn't implemented yet. To sum up the PvE side, the developers have promised a wide range of activities: dungeons, novel content, open world bosses, crafting, farming, and so much more. However, the problem is that they are trying to promise everything. There is no clear timeline or guarantee when or if these features will be finished. While it's fun to imagine all potential, this level of ambition often leads to disappointment, especially if the game foundation like combat system isn't strong. We can hope that developers will deliver, but as it stands now, they have set their sights really high. And as the saying goes, the higher you aim, the harder you fall. Now let's talk about PvP content. Just like with the PvE, the developers have promised the ultimate MMORPG experience. Imagine everything you could want: battlegrounds, arenas, open world PvP, castle sieges, naval battles. It's all in the game's roadmap. But again, most of these features are in the early stages of the development, with low completion percentage, and there is no clear indication of when they will be added. So what do we have right now? Currently, there are some kind of territorial wars, guild activities, and the option for the open world PvP outside of safe zones if you are in the right channel. But that's about it. And here is the issue. When a game splits its players base between PvE and PvP channels on the same server, meaningful PvP often doesn't happen. Players who don't want to engage in PvP simply avoid it by staying on the PvE channels. Whether this is a good or bad design choice is up to you to decide. At the moment, with the European servers not working, we are only tested PvP on American servers. And with the clunky combat system, calling it PvP feels like a really stretch. It's jittery, unresponsive, and far from enjoyable. But I gave it a try, tested what I could, and you can see results on the screen right now. So comment below, maybe I don't see something, and maybe my level is too low and I don't see all this beautiful content for PvE and PvP. Just please comment below what else the game can offer right now, and I will dig deeper in that. But for now, that's what we have from the game. Now here's the important point. Everything the developers promised in early access is technically in the game, and this is important. But according to the roadmap, none of it is fully ready. This makes it really frustrating to figure out or understand even after I played few days in the game. Of course, this is just my personal view, but based on my experience so far, it feels like we only have the bare bones of the game. It's like they aim to be the best MMO out there, but there is no solid proof of the current team can deliver, especially when you compare the 2023 trailer to what we actually have in the game right now. Early access is a super cheap, with no clear dates or timelines for when it will end or when we will see major features. Plus, the existing mechanics and content are in pretty poor shape. Just look at the combat, which is arguably the most important part of MMORPG. It's almost unplayable right now. Unless the developers make serious improvements soon, I doubt the players will stick around. Animation and old school stand still, cast, then move style don't match that vision at all. It's frustrating. It's just frustrating. You could say I'm being pessimistic, but we have been burned so many times by the next biggest MMORPG with everything in it, so I'm just trying to be realistic. It doesn't look great at the moment, and the devs really need to take community feedback seriously and rebuild the core systems. Not to add additional features, but to rebuild the core systems. No one is going to care about the cool C content if the clunky combat, awkward movement and server instability make them quit within a week or maybe a few days. Personally, I always will look out for the new MMORPGs and I always will try them and I always will hope the developers will do some good job. But if you will compare this game, let's say for the Throne and Liberty, where the main issue is the end game content, at least you see some polish in the basic mechanics like combat, skills, your character building system, different weapons, how the PvP and PvE works. Here I was just disappointed from the day one by the poor quality of the core game, even before I even get to the content itself. Could this early access phase help the developers fix things within the year or so? Honestly, one more time, I doubt that. I doubt that in 1 year they can change things in really good way. But if they will focus on the core things and they will fix them and they will try to polish things based on the community feedback, not just adding new features or new assets from the store, then maybe they can turn the situation. And I will really hope on that. Of course, it's just my opinion. Please comment below what you think about the game. And Variety Technology Studio, let's wish them the good luck and everything. I hope they can make it. It was PLK. Please subscribe to the channel. If you like the content, like the content. If you dislike the content, also do that. It will help with engagement of the video and people will see it and people will react it. That's what I need from you guys. Love you. See you next one. Bye.